Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today we're going to discuss a kind of news item about international banking as well as compliance. We're going to dive into the subject of what is called Operation Atlantis, which is a collaboration between, I believe it is 5 different federal governments on the purposes of investigating and going after possible tax evaders, etc. And in particular, a kind of operation news story that has come out regarding one of the long-time better-known offshore banks. And so stick around. I'm going to discuss not only the details of this particular case, but also what the repercussions and expectations that you should have based on this are, because I think it's worth diving into. So stick around till the end. All right, before we do that, there is something you should really do, which, yes, you've guessed it, is hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up at the end. It really helps us. If you've got any questions, please put them in the comments. And yeah, that's going to be really useful for us. If you're interested at all in this subject of how to do offshore banking or international banking, how to form companies, optimize your taxes internationally, payment processing, investing, residencies, citizenships, tax planning, etc., then please reach out to us. You can book a call with me. There's a link below, clarity.fm/Michael Rosmer, or you can go to our websites, offshorecitizen.net or offshorecapitalist.com. Okay, with that in mind, what is going on here? So a news article came out, there's actually been a few of them now over the last little bit, pertaining to Euro-Pacific Bank. So for those of you who don't know, Euro-Pacific Bank is a bank owned by Peter Schiff, the fairly well-known gold bug, kind of libertarian capitalist type dude. He's got quite a significant following on Twitter, and he's got a podcast and things like this. He's a long-time bull in the gold space. I believe he has a company that sells gold. He is very notoriously anti-Bitcoin, and yeah, I mean, he's got his own set of beliefs. Probably leans toward the Austrian economics perspective. And was famous for, he did a video back around the time of the Occupy Wall Street movement where he discussed I'm the 1%, let's talk, and kind of did something that went viral and all this kind of stuff. So anyway, cool stuff for him. So there's this bank. They were originally domiciled in St. Vincent. It was there for quite a few years, and St. Vincent was never really a great place, I would say, from a kind of a regulatory whatever standpoint. And as things got tougher, as they struggled with their correspondent banks, they ended up relocating to Puerto Rico, where they're based now. And they're probably one of the better known banks for small offshore operations. So I can tell you that in general, we haven't been big fans of Euro-Pacific, in part because, and this is going to be kind of ironic with respect to the compliance that we're going to get into this case here, but it was fairly easy to open up accounts there, but they were really anal on the compliance when you would do transactions. And it just kind of created a lot of business friction, okay? Well, what happened? What happened was there's a thing called Operation Atlantis, created, I believe it is between Australia, New Zealand, the US, Canada, and UK, to kind of go after tax evaders and really go after centers where they might get after people. And so one of these happened to be the bank, okay? So supposedly, what happened was their offices in 2 different places, I think it was in Puerto Rico and in UK, but I might have that slightly off, were like subpoenaed or whatever for a bunch of information. They have about somewhere around 13,000 clients or something like that, holding a couple $100 million in the bank, so very small bank, right? And it was to try and get a bunch of information suggesting that these people could be tax evaders, these people could be whatever, okay? Now, this is certainly not an indication that Euro-Pacific Bank has done anything wrong, and there's been kind of some fun controversy as the people kind of brought Peter Schiff in under false pretenses and kind of jumped him and created this article, and he created some counter statements, and he sued the media organization in Australia, and all this kind of stuff has come out around it, okay? But the bottom line is that, hey, listen, there's nothing wrong with having a bank that serves foreigners. There is nothing wrong with having an offshore bank. And there's nothing wrong with people having bank accounts in there. So The only argument that somebody could make that there was anything wrong was that they had lax kind of regulations, or not regulations, but procedures for accepting who they had to go in there, and or they deliberately facilitated money laundering or tax evasion or something like that. Now, having been somebody who's worked with that bank over, I mean, quite a few years, right? Probably goes back to like 2014, 2013, something like that. I can tell you that they're not a bank that's out there trying to facilitate this sort of thing, okay? There are, in fact, they're quite careful not to deal with Americans at all, really anything to do with the US, they don't want to touch. They have been marketed, and this is probably a bad thing for them, but they have been marketed to some extent that they're not part of CRS, and so there's kind of some reporting obligations that can be avoided there. And so, you know, that's probably not so great. Their compliance process, getting a bank account opened, not a big deal. It's quite straightforward and quite simple, and they're pretty open to a broad range of companies, which is, you know, also pretty good. The bad thing, like I said, from an operational standpoint, but good from the perspective of it's unlikely that they're going to have any problems in this whole thing, is that the transactions, which is really where the real risk comes in anyway, right? Like opening a bank account, who cares? So you have a bank account there. It means nothing unless you use it. And so when you go to use it, then you find, hey, we need supporting documentation, et cetera, to an extent that you don't in a lot of different cases, certainly means that they're probably going to be in a good position. All right. So anyway, we'll continue to bring you kind of updates if anything changes over time. But what I really wanted to hone into, because this does make a difference for the decisions that you should be making about your planning, is this Operation Atlantis, this collaboration between these 5 major countries, and the tactics they are taking of, instead of trying to find the individuals, going after kind of centers where they can get them, right? And we saw this, of course, with respect to stuff like the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, it's called the Lux Papers or whatever, from Luxembourg. Anyway, these different massive document finds that reveal, you know, what's going on. And that, I think, is worth noting for a few different reasons. One is, I think that you're going to find banks in general are probably, as much as they were being tight before, they're going to be tighter. And that's kind of unfortunate for getting things done. But anyway, that's the way that it goes. Number 2, in addition to it being, you know, more complicated in that regard, it is highly likely that you're going to be in a position where you're going to want to, more than ever, make sure that what you're doing is fully compliant, okay? So people have, I remember people used to come to me and they'd say, well, how would the government know? It's like, well, they have ways. And they would say, well, there's no reporting. And it's like, and what they're referring to there is not no reporting obligations that they have. Maybe they had reporting obligations. But rather they would say, you know, like the bank isn't reporting. It doesn't matter. Like, there are other ways that governments can find this stuff out, okay? So the perspective that I have always taken, the thing that I have always told people for years and years and years, is you want to build structures in such a way that the government can see everything and you can say, have at it, no big deal, because we're designing legal structures. We have a system that is fully compliant, and here is the laws to support it. And if you want to go through and take a look, by all means, go through and take a look. That is what you want, because in the long run, 2 things are true. One is, A, it's just the peace of mind is worth it, right? But the second is, I've seen so many cases over the years, not necessarily with people who I was dealing with, but in kind of this whole space. And a really good example is what happened with UBS when the US government cracked them in 2009. Okay, UBS, largest Swiss bank, for years could shelter this tax evasion money in their bank. And people would say, hey, look, Swiss bank secrecy, what can the government do? They can't know, right? Until they could. And so for years, for decades, that protected them. And then at some point in time, the government figured out how to break UBS, and suddenly that information was out, and then down fell Credit Suisse, and then all the other Swiss banks, to the point where now, you know, you don't have any sort of protection from there. And so you just shouldn't think, like, it's very short-term thinking to think, hey, I'm just going to fly under the radar and do something that's complicit and I'm going to break the rules, and I'm going to rely on not getting caught. That's just not a very good way to operate. The smarter way to operate is to say, hey, I'm going to put the extra work in up front. Maybe it's going to be a little bit more work, right? Maybe it's going to cost me an extra $20,000. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a structure that is compliant. And once I've got it in place, I'm going to focus on building my business. And I'm going to know that everything is in order and it achieves the objectives that I want. And if anything goes wrong, if somebody comes and says, hey, listen, we're concerned about what you're doing, you can say, no problems. I'm happy to show you that what I'm doing is fully legitimate. So anyway, that's the perspective that I take. You can tell me what it is that you think, but I think that the days, probably in the 80s and the 90s, you could get away with all kinds of stuff. Those days are past. It's increasingly difficult as we get more computerization, more advanced AI, etc. These things are going to be gone, and you just shouldn't rely on something else. So anyway, tell me what you think in the comments. If you're interested in this sort of thing and you would like some assistance, please reach out to me. You can book a call, clarity.fm/Michael Rosmer, link below. Subscribe to our channel, click the notification bell, get reminded if you like this video, click the like button. Check out our websites, offshorecitizen.net, offshorecapitalist.com, and I'm going to see you guys on the next video.